You're listening to Season 2 of Beyond Insights, your go-to podcast for all things accounting, business, and technology.
Unsure how to improve your leadership skills, or whether you're suited to being a leader to begin with? Looking for ways to build a stronger team or take better risks? Then stay tuned.
From cybersecurity, blockchain, and AI innovations to sustainability, employee retention, and work-life balance, we've got you covered.
We speak to knowledgeable and insightful guests from varied backgrounds, industries, and locations from all around the globe.
From this multiplicity of thought, we strive to find solutions to our most urgent business problems.
Whether you're a small business owner, an accountant, entrepreneur, or even a young professional looking to progress, this podcast is for you.
Thank you for tuning in. Let's dive right in and go beyond insights.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of Beyond Insights. Today we are joined by Byron Cowie, who's back again from Elliptic. Byron, you joined us previously to talk about blockchain analytics, what cryptocurrency is, a lot of questions that people often ask. And today we're going to be revisiting the downfall of FTX and considering the value of good, clean accounting data. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to be back. Thank you for having me, Alex. Super excited. And this is a really fascinating topic. There's just so many angles you can look at it from. So, hope your audience learns a thing or two about it and becomes equally fascinated would be cool.
Sure, they will. It's a very interesting story from all sorts of different angles. Thought it was worth mentioning, although we planned this episode quite a while ago, it's been incredibly timely with Bybit, another crypto exchange that's just been hacked for $1.5 billion on the 21st of February 2025. So the biggest crypto hack I think that's happened so far.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. The team at Elliptic were really working around the clock as well to help Bybit to trace funds, as the known as the Lazarus Group, who were the people that were involved in the Bybit hack, tried to move funds, across the blockchain to all sorts of different places and that sort of thing. So it's really been such a topical thing that's been happening at the moment. I think different to FTX in some respects. Yes, FTX were hacked along the way, but FTX had a downfall of a different sort. This was obviously with Bybit was sort of like a sort of malware hack that happened to Bybit, whereas with the FTX story, there's lots of angles you can look at it from. Yes, they were hacked. They misused customer funds. A whole lot of things happened on the side and that around it. So it was quite a lot more chaos, I suppose, with the FTX one. But the size and quantum of the Bybit hack is just extraordinary. So it's really created quite a lot of waves in the crypto industry and a lot of also increased awareness just again around the holding of customer funds and the safekeeping of those. So
And also another angle of cybersecurity, considering your security on the blockchain.
Yeah, exactly. And this sort of also happened so quickly, I suppose, necessarily in the Bybit case on how quickly the funds were moved, the quantum of them and everything like that. So that's another interesting sort of angle to look at it from.
So unfortunately not our main topic for today, but definitely something that's interesting. And I will link some articles below so that if anyone who's watching this podcast is interested, you can just check out the episode notes and we'll include some articles there. But returning to the topic of FTX, there really is a lot to cover. So I thought I would do a little recap, maybe starting with an introduction to FTX and then some of their accounting failures. Because while they were hacked, actually a lot of people didn't even realize that at the time because there was so much else that was going on. So briefly, if you don't know, FTX launched in 2019 and it was quite a popular exchange platform until everything pretty much came crashing down in November of 2022, also very quickly. So one way to get cryptocurrency is to open an account on a digital trading platform, which is what FTX was. So it lets people buy one coin and then trade it for another. And in January 2022, FTX was worth $32 billion. So it was a very successful company that really became successful very quickly. Then what appeared to be an accounting oversight turned out to be major fraud, with customer funds going to accounts that were controlled by Alameda Research, which was a crypto trading firm affiliated and run alongside FTX. And so they were going to Alameda Research instead of going to FTX itself. And then after that revelation, basically after the balance sheet was leaked, everything fell apart. So that's a quick recap of what exactly happened. But I thought, maybe we can start with, why is the FTX story so interesting?
Yeah, it is really fascinating. I mean, the FTX was also what stands for almost like futures trading exchange, was sort of what FTX was abbreviated for, and it allowed people to trade with collateral and leverage. So you could leverage, meaning you don't need to put all the money down necessarily, but you could trade at like 10x leverage, which gave traders in a very volatile environment the ability to use small amounts of capital to potentially make like huge outsized gains. What FTX did better than everyone else was there were a lot of flaws around this business model, which are quite technical and quite complex, but they managed to solve them with a very small team, actually. And with a lot of the people had come from quantitative trading backgrounds at places like Jane Street and those sorts of places. And yeah, like you said, the company became worth $32 billion. And what a lot of people thought was almost overnight. It wasn't quite, but yeah, it was pretty much an overnight sensation. So it was from relative obscurity to fame. Their founder's very odd as well. I mean, he would live game while doing interviews on television. He would live at the office, sleep at the office. They believed in this concept of effective altruism, so basically earning money to give it away, which was interesting motivation in itself. And then this relationship that they had with Binance, and Binance being the world's biggest crypto exchange, Binance actually invested in FTX, fell out with FTX, and then was actually also the final nail in their coffin and trying to place an acquisition offer to buy them right at the end, but in doing their due diligence just looked under what was under the rug type of thing and didn't like what they saw. Yeah. So that was interesting. And amidst all of this saga playing out on Twitter, which I don't think we were used to, I mean, maybe in 2025 we're more used to politicians talking to each other and various things over Twitter, but yeah, it was two heavyweights of the crypto industry going at one another on Twitter. And then, like we've spoken already, FTX got hacked in the midst of all of this for $477 million. And those funds continue to sort of be tracked on the blockchain and move. And sort of that hasn't necessarily reached completion either. So we could probably talk about hours on this topic. So yeah, we can get straight into some of the things that interest you.
So I guess from the perspective of accounting principles then, since a lot of our listeners are accountants or they're using accounting software, I know that there were a lot of issues, to say the least, with the accounting at FTX. How do you think that a more robust accounting system or clean data could have prevented some of the major issues that they faced, especially in terms of the mismanagement of customer funds?
Yeah, Alex, you really hit the nail on the head there. I think the safekeeping and custody of customer funds is really central to the FTX case. They were sitting on billions of dollars of customer funds. And like any traditional finance institution needs to safeguard those assets and only use them for the purposes of which customers allow them to. With crypto exchanges, they're different to banks in terms of banks are allowed to do something called sort of fractional reserve banking. So we all know that the bank doesn't keep all of our money in the bank. It uses it for other things to generate yield, to loan to others and those sorts of things. Crypto exchanges are generally regulated, or even in their terms and conditions, they should self-regulate that they're one-to-one. So if you bought a Bitcoin on their platform, they should be holding that Bitcoin for you. So what was happening at FTX was they had a backdoor on their platform, which may be criminal and in some people's eyes, may not in others. They might have been using the backdoor to sweep money from their own exchange to Alameda to trade for them, which might have been the own profits that they generated, which would largely have been fine, except that they were doing it with customer funds as well. So central to this, I think, for like sort of people that work in finance and accounting is like if you're sitting on customer funds, you obviously have to safeguard them and only use them for the purposes of what they're there for. I think then another concept of sort of intercompany accounting comes into this. I mean, everyone's sort of worked with an intercompany account of sorts in their life before. It's just obviously key to understand what we're using those intercompany accounts for. You know, what is moving between the two entities? Why are they moving? So if you work in a corporate job in a finance department, you know, challenging your company's intercompany accounts, looking at the detail into them. If you're an accountant, an auditor, or an advisor, you should probably be doing the same, because we know from like Steinhoff and various other sort of Enron disasters and debacles that have happened, intercompany funds of other entities have been sort of central to those as well. So I'd say intercompany accounting is super key to that. And then just sort of robust accounting sort of controls generally on reconciling your balance sheet every month, closing your balance sheet, having a finance team in place. Like if you look at FTX's story, and if you actually look at their org chart, they never had a VP of finance, a CFO sort of in place. And while they might have, that person wasn't very high up on the organization. So not just do you need a strong individual leader, you obviously need a team to run a business of that size and that value. So lots of lessons, I think, for those of us that work in finance to sort of take to heart.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the fact that they didn't have a finance team astounds me. I mean, it kind of makes sense when you see what came out afterwards, but you think you have such a big company like that. It seems crazy.
Yeah, I think things like employee expense claims were, you know, they had an emoji reaction to show that they were approved. I mean, whether someone looked at those or not, there was very loose controls around supplier payments and sort of management of investor funds and that sort of thing. I mean, right up until their downfall, and FTX was sponsoring, you know, stadiums in the US and entering into multi-year like influencer and marketing agreements and anything. I mean, having a good finance team to sort of, you know, manage the runway of the company, manage investor funds that are coming in, and that sort of thing is super crucial. So yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there.
Sure. And then sort of where this all came out was when their balance sheet was leaked, and they saw that there was a lack of diversification, and Alameda Research and FTX were a lot more closely tied together than people had thought. I was wondering if maybe you could take us through what happened there.
Yeah, it was a very interesting relationship. So Alameda was a trading firm. They generally tracked or tried to generate yield, so they would get assets from wherever they could, from clients or from FTX in this case, which they shouldn't have been, but they generally traded high risk assets to generate a yield for themselves, sort of like a hedge fund would, or whatever case was. They were unregulated, it was private money, they pretty much could do what they wanted to, especially if we rewind the clock a few years back where regulation wasn't as tight on the crypto industry, or as it is becoming now. So what they were doing was accessing funds from FTX's platform, using those funds for all sorts of different sources and, you know, high risk strategies. And sort of what happened was the closeness of the two entities was a problem, because they were pretty much run out of the same offices by the same people, and kind of while there was an element of Chinese walls between them, there weren't really. I think there was probably also a lot of naivety. It was obviously a lot of young people running an incredibly valuable business that was just growing faster than they could probably manage necessarily. And so there was probably a lot of cutting of corners around different things. So I think there could have been better sort of segregation between the two entities. But what ended up happening was FTX also launched its own token or coin called FTT, which is similar to like a share in a business, and that you could share in the revenues and profits of FTX, and you got trading discounts, and it became more valuable over time as FTX did. What it turned out though was that Alameda was holding a bunch of this FTT, and when their balance sheet was leaked, people obviously came aware of the fact that they were sort of over leveraged to FTX, and if the value of FTT went down, they wouldn't obviously be able to pay any of the intercompany loans back. Whereas where this all started to play out in the public. So that was kind of another sort of strange way in which the two entities were closely coupled together. And then once there was what we call FUD in the market, like fear, uncertainty, sort of that comes into the market, and crypto prices started to drop quite rapidly, FTT actually sunk very quickly as well in price, which meant that the assets that Alameda were holding were declining all the time. And as people were withdrawing funds from FTX in a panic, which is almost like what's called a bank run on a crypto exchange, a normal crypto exchange would have all the assets one-to-one, could easily pay them back. But in FTX's case, they didn't. They were held in a different token, which was declining in value. So they actually couldn't pay customers back, which is kind of where the platform fell apart and shut down.
Sure. And that's kind of why it happened so quickly. Like you said, so many people got scared when they found out, they started withdrawing. And then, yeah, for people who, I saw a story yesterday of someone who said he'd put all of his life savings into FTX and then suddenly he had nothing.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly frightening to be able to go onto the platform and try and process a withdrawal for your funds, and the withdrawals keep failing or being delayed. Customer support at FTX are probably not getting back to you. It must have been incredibly frightening that, everything that would have been gone overnight. And there were many cases like that. I mean, and I think there were a lot of employees at FTX that also had their life savings on the platform as well. I mean, why wouldn't you, in a sense? Like, it was a gold rush of the crypto times and that sort of bull market. They were probably holding a lot of FTT as well. I mean, it's like holding stock in a company that you work for. You were aligned with the company and everything. So yeah, it was just so many stories of that came out of that was incredibly frightening.
Absolutely. How do you think some better accounting protocols and maybe more clear divisions of responsibility could have helped in terms of the commingling of funds between FTX and Alameda Research?
Yes, that's a great question. And I suppose the main sort of learning out of this was, like, any company holding customer funds, whether that be normal fiat money, cryptocurrency, other assets, or whatever, it has a duty and is also obviously legally obliged to sort of safely custody those funds and only use them for the purposes that they should. So, like, strict weekly, monthly, daily sort of reconciliations on those funds, making sure that you have them all on hand and that they're exactly where they're supposed to be. A good old-fashioned accounting recon can go a long way. In a high trading exchange environment, an automated one probably goes even further. You could follow it in live time. Strict closing of, like, management accounts, I think, was incredibly important. If you're not, like, closing the books every month, things get lost. People come and go in finance departments. Institutional knowledge gets lost, and history of transactions, balances, and things start to make less sense. And it's far more difficult to recreate that, months down the line rather than days after the event has happened. So I think that's incredibly important. Segregating your customers' funds from your own corporate funds, I think, is incredibly important. When I worked at Luno, which was a sort of emerging markets crypto exchange, we used to have very separate customer fund bank accounts with their funds in it, and those which were for corporate purposes. It made, like, reconciliation, accounting, segregation, just so much easier. And the same was done with the crypto on our platform. People being audited, I know audit generally happens quite a lot later after the event, but obviously incredibly important to have an external set of eyes on what's happening and advising you on those things. It also gives the public, your bank, your investors, the ability to know that your finances have been verified. And then, especially in the crypto environment, there's a concept called proof of reserves, and that basically means that the crypto exchanges are proving to you that they're holding all of your funds exactly where they're supposed to be and that they're available, which has become a very important sort of integral part on trusting a crypto platform when you use it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think that first point that you raised, if you're not tracking all your transactions and then you try to find, like, where did this come from, where did that go to further down the line, it's really, really difficult to try and recreate that. So I think that's a really important learning. And also, I was surprised they had so many investors who invested a huge amount of money, but without the certainty, they hadn't ever seen the balance sheet before. They didn't actually know. So there was a lot of trust placed, which I suppose people today probably no longer go in with that level of trust for other exchanges.
It's such a good point, Alex. Everyone wanted to get in on the action of FTX. Everyone wanted to be, this business that grew from nothing to $32 billion in value. Everyone wanted a piece of it. And so hence, I think they were making sort of shortcuts on investments. I think with venture capital investors, often they have like a lead investor and then those that invest alongside it. And I think those that invest alongside it often require the lead investor to do quite a lot of the due diligence that you were mentioning. And that due diligence might have been very light touch at the time, in the sense of, like this, let's get this deal done as quickly as possible. The co-investors invest along with it. But yeah, I think that FTX, or what happened at FTX really did shake up the market, and I think it's made like due diligence on investment a lot more important, not just around the customer funds, but I think the reputation of those investors as well, and individuals, celebrities that were investing and endorsing FTX and that as well, had a huge amount of sort of reputational damage to them as well, like personal brands and the followings that they had created and that sort of thing, or people that trust you necessarily, and they trust you to be able to, or tell them that something that you're using is safe and reliable. And so yeah, very interesting from a sort of an investor perspective as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of learnings from an investment perspective. Then returning to what actually happened with FTX when all of this blew up, we mentioned briefly their founder, SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, a very strange guy in many ways. But he was eventually arrested on 8 charges, including money laundering, wire fraud, campaign finance violations, and securities fraud. I think he's now been sentenced to 150 years in jail. So it really, from being one of the youngest, wealthiest men in the world to suddenly being this criminal, a lot changed really quickly. I know the lawsuit against him also accused FTX of using a Ponzi scheme to misuse funds and move customer money between entities. How were they able to launder this money on the blockchain?
Yeah, it's an important distinction, I suppose, necessarily in the fact that centralized exchanges are largely like walled gardens off the blockchain. So what generally happens is that people that are trading on the platform will trade within the walled garden of the platform, and only those transactions which happen with external parties go onto the blockchain. So actually, with seeing what was happening within FTX is not possible unless you have access to FTX. On the blockchain, you would only see what was happening between FTX and sort of external nodes on the blockchain. So actually, the fact that customer funds were not visible on the blockchain, they would have been on the blockchain, but not visible to be known necessarily whether they were with FTX or with Alameda. So I think that was quite an important distinction, and definitely one of the distinct drawbacks of a centralized exchange, and sort of why they're sort of sometimes at odds with the crypto industry, because with decentralized finance, people are able to create their own wallets on the blockchain, be self-sovereign, look after their own security, trade peer-to-peer with one another. And that sounds all good and well, but in a lot of cases it's very complicated to do, which is kind of why we use centralized exchanges. They're easy to use, they have nice user interfaces, they market to us, they have a lot of liquidity, so it's easy to trade on them with a click of a button. You can also obviously offboard your money into fiat money, which you can't do in decentralized finance. So centralized exchanges really do play their place, but they do have some distinct drawbacks with them as well.
Yeah, makes sense. So I suppose the thing is, if you're going to be using a centralized exchange, really, which was hard in the case of FTX, but like doing your research to find out that you can actually trust this exchange.
Yeah, agreed. And there's so many credentials that you can sort of look into on those. Is the exchange, does it, have people that are visible on, different platforms and that are visible and that sort of thing, that are respected and, have been in the game for a while? Is the company audited? Do they have proof of reserves? Are they domiciled in a location that has regulation? If they're a global exchange, are they regulated in the country that you operate? I mean, dealing with an entity out of the British Virgin Islands from South Africa, from the UK, it doesn't exactly give you the same level of protection as dealing with the UK subsidiary who is licensed by the authority in that jurisdiction. So there's lots of mechanisms, I think, that consumers can use to make sure that they're dealing with reputable parties, and especially with the exchanges' appetite for security and the education that they do with their customers, helping you with two-factor authentication, best-in-class security, and really speaking and marketing to those things, I think, are incredibly powerful in building customer trust.
Yeah, definitely. Returning to the accounting now, my next question is, what role can good accounting data play in uncovering financial fraud, even in the crypto space?
Yeah, it's obviously key. I mean, any business that whether they operate on chain or if they operate off chain, and sort of it should make no distinction necessarily. Like, good accounting practice obviously reduces any sort of fraud risks around anything that happened. And I think in the case of FTX, there was definitely the incentive for fraud due to the fact of like the amount of funds that they were sitting on, and there was certainly also the opportunity for fraud as well due to the chaos, lack of senior management, and everything else that was going on, related entities, and that there was certainly the opportunity for fraud to happen. So I think good, clean accounting data necessarily provides the investors, firstly, of that business with the ability to look at it and know that what they have and what they say they have makes sense on their balance sheet. I think is key. Secondly, for people like us and consumers, then knowing, good clean accounting data that is audited and that is regulated, and that provides a huge deal of trust to us as well. But just maybe if you're also just working at a business, I mean, yourself, like knowing that business is, acting reputably and that sort of thing, generally having a good finance team that are not just leading the business from a strategic and perspective, but also just operationally making all the nuts and bolts of the business work from a control perspective, I think are incredibly important.
Absolutely. And then something that actually Jodie Lee, our head of product, discusses in some lectures she gives at FITS when she talks about internal controls. I think internal controls is something that was clearly really lacking in FTX. They said that there was, they found there was really a lack of appropriate management. As you were saying, the governance really could have been better, and their actual organizational structure, if you look at their org chart, there were all of these different entities, most of which people hadn't even heard of before, and SBF was really involved in all of them. What role do you think this plays in the security and also the integrity of a business?
Yeah, all just sort of huge red flags, I suppose, necessarily, just on everything that was happening. Just to add to your list as well, I mean, I think the level of sort of accounting software, they were using small business accounting tooling, which is fine if you're a small business, or it's fine if you're an uncomplicated business. But if you're a $32 billion asset holding billions of dollars of customer funds with billions of transactions going through your platform daily, I don't imagine small business tooling is going to be fit for purpose there. So it's kind of just like all of those red flags sort of stacked up necessarily sort of contributed to the eventual downfall of FTX and itself, which I think was all sort of pointed in the same direction. It was almost like too good to be true.
I think sometimes when things seem too good to be true, they probably are.
And and I think it's a case of, if you think of like the market could have continued the way it was and maybe none of this would have happened. But I think in a nascent asset class like crypto is, there's going to be ups and downs in the market, and it's generally when the market downturns that you're kind of exposed as a business, which FTX were. So yeah.
Okay, something that was really interesting, I think, that's been glossed over in a lot of the sort of storytelling of this case is the fact, as we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, that FTX was also hacked. At the same time that all of this was happening, $477 million was stolen by an unidentified hacker. And Elliptic investigated this. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was very much overlooked, I think, in the midst of everything happening. The company had already started to sort of like fall apart now. Customers were trying to withdraw funds, they couldn't. Um, Staff had been spooked. And so it obviously just created this absolute chaos and obviously the perfect opportunity for a hacker to strike. And in the midst of this, then they started to drain sort of FTX's crypto wallets. And they lost the dollar equivalent is 477 million of Ethereum that was sort of taken from them at the time. So yeah, unidentified hacker. But obviously there was then rumors around, who this was, how did this happen, and everything like that. And it's a huge amount of money to have lost also in a short amount of time when you're already obviously unable to pay customer funds back. So it just sort of doubled down on all the issues that they were already having.
Yeah, really opportunistic hacker. And I almost wonder if it was like an inside job, somebody who knew what was going on.
Yeah, it was obviously, that was one of the sort of main conspiracy theories around it as well. So yeah, very interesting.
And what happens when cryptocurrency is stolen? Is there a way that owners can freeze the transactions?
It's a very interesting question. So for native tokens, which are your main cryptocurrencies, generally there isn't a way to freeze transactions. If a cryptocurrency is issued by a centralized party, so i.e. said bank creates their own stable coin or cryptocurrency, they may have the ability to freeze or block funds. So there's a huge distinction there between sort of centralized parties issuing cryptocurrencies and those which are decentralized. So I think the criminals in this case were obviously keen to get make sure the tokens remained in native tokens that weren't able to be frozen, and that was why they tried to make sure they were not controlled by a central party, so that in any case their funds wouldn't be blocked. Which I think, as they tried to launder money through the blockchain, their bounty of funds that they had stolen did start to get whittled down as certain protocols and other places, maybe centralized exchanges that they tried to move money to, would kind of block the funds so that they wouldn't be able to be moved any further.
Oh, so it's actually, well, quite a difficult thing to pull off. I know that the hacker also went through the trouble of converting a lot of assets into Bitcoin. Why would they have done this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and sort of one that no one has an absolute clear answer on, but there's probably a few reasons. Sort of one, Bitcoin is incredibly decentralized. A lot of cryptocurrencies, especially newer ones, are in some respects decentralized, but also because they are held by so few parties in the beginning, they actually act in a centralized manner. Because Bitcoin has been around the longest and it's the oldest and it's the most widely used, it is the most widely decentralized in that respect. So probably the easiest for them to necessarily to move it. Another reason would have been probably the sort of like the liquidity on Bitcoin. So that would be the ability to sell or buy Bitcoin. So they might have been able to use sort of unidentified OTC desks or various things to try and offboard the crypto to fiat currency, or other nefarious sources like that. It would have been a lot easier to sell a huge amount of Bitcoin than it would have been on other transactions. Also, without affecting the price necessarily, would have also come into it. So a lot of the cryptos also actually remain dormant for quite a long period of time. So while blockchain intelligence firms like Elliptic track all the funds through the blockchain, a lot of them remain dormant for a long period of time until something happens again and they start moving. And we'll again build triggers into our product so that we can alert users of a tool like Elliptic that these funds are starting to move again, so that they should be aware if their platform interacts with funds from, say, the Bybit hack or from the FTX hack as well.
So you can track those as they stop being dormant and they're moving along the blockchain.
Correct, yeah. So that's very much key to what Elliptic's intelligence collection team does, is sort of building a flow of funds and tracing those funds through, so that if our customers interact with, or that are using our platform, interact with those funds, they'll get a high risk score or sort of an assertion flag on those funds to tell them of the sort of the source of those funds.
Oh, amazing. So looking now beyond the hack of FTX, what role do you think FTX's internal data management failures played in making the organization vulnerable to both internal and external threats? Do you think better tracking and auditing practice could have reduced the risk of, well, fraud we've already covered? Yes, it definitely could. And what about theft?
Yes, definitely. I mean, they holding that level of customer funds created a huge responsibility on them, both legally and ethically, to make sure those customer funds were safeguarded. And it's really interesting, I think, just to look at the sort of security controls around that. There are numerous sort of traditional finance methods that you could employ to safeguard and have internal controls over funds, but there was also numerous crypto techniques that you can also apply to ensure that the funds are safeguarded. So I think there was downfalls on sort of both of those in FTX's case. I mean, it's basic things around who has access to what, who can move what, who has view access to something versus read access to something, to write access to something, and it goes beyond just necessarily the ability to move funds, but I think it was, the ability to write code in your database and how your product works, and there's all those information security sort of safeguards needed to be in place. I mean, things like in the case of the Bybit hack, malware that got onto their servers and that sort of thing, is us as like sort of people that working in the front line of a business have information security training that we should take hugely seriously, and clicking on links, opening attachments from emails of people you don't know, not keeping up to date with training, all of those sorts of things, I think also just sort of create the opportunity or the risk for there to be sort of wider scale fraud than necessarily you could even imagine, which I think was kind of like in the sort of parallels in both of these cases. So yeah, I think we've spoken a lot about like fraud risks. We've spoken a lot about accounting control, good financial housekeeping and financial records and control. We've spoken about the place investors play, but I think information security teams at businesses have also a huge responsibility to play. And each of those of us that interact with, technology every day also equally have that same responsibility to be the sort of first line of defense at the places that we work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that would apply to any business, every business, being able to make sure that you are keeping things as secure as possible, that you're paying attention in all the cybersecurity trainings that I know no one wants to do, but they're actually really important, because if there's an opportunity for fraud or theft and there's an intent for that and you don't have those right protocols in place, then it's actually relatively easy, for someone to phish from you, to put malware on your computer, whatever it may be. So I think that's a really good takeaway for all businesses.
I mean, we often just need to remind ourselves on is, we get busy with things. You've got hundreds of emails to get through and, you're not concentrating on what you're doing. And it's, it's often just, people don't generally have bad intentions, but, people do make mistakes, and hackers and nefarious individuals are becoming more and more sophisticated all the time, right? So I think we also need to keep our guards up on that account.
Absolutely. So kind of some final thoughts. If we look at the broader landscape of cryptocurrency exchanges, what steps do you think that regulators and businesses should take to ensure that they have clean accounting data, proper governance, and internal controls to prevent a future collapse like FTX?
Yes, it's probably a good way to sort of package everything together. And I think reiterating maybe a few of the things I've said around like ensuring that crypto parties are regulated, or crypto businesses are regulated, and that may mean different regulation for different types of crypto businesses. So I mean that can be very heavy-handed for those that deal with retail consumers, to maybe lighter touch for somewhat more decentralized trading, or whatever the case would be on those. I mean, there might be a difference in the way that different crypto businesses are regulated. Ensuring that they're audited, making proof of reserves kind of like a mandatory thing that crypto exchanges should have, to ensure that customers can be aware of the safekeeping of their funds and that they're where they need to be. They should also be very open about their security protocols. Regulators should also probably be, when issuing licenses, and then they already do a lot of this and already becoming a lot more sophisticated with it, ensuring that crypto businesses have tools like Elliptic, for example, to make sure you're on top of your crypto compliance and anti-money laundering. You're aware of parties and counterparties that you're dealing with. Best-in-class security, best-in-class information security, and just regular submissions to the regulators in terms of the financial position and health of the business, I think is incredibly important, and methods for the regulators to ensure the sort of validity of the information that's being provided to them. So I think the industry's come like such a long way already in such a short time in the space, and I think it will continue to evolve as the space becomes sort of more valuable and sort of more popular as well.
Oh, I think a very good way to sum up the very big topic that we have been discussing today. I suppose I just have a few rapid fire questions for you. We always like to end our podcast with a few of these questions. So what's one piece of software besides Sift, and I suppose I should say besides Elliptic, that you can't live without?
I suppose Zero probably pops to mind as the top one in terms of like just how malleable it is in terms of its APIs, what it connects to, its power of its marketplace. And crypto businesses have actually built like you would have a sub ledger for inventory or for bank or for creditors. Crypto businesses like Tress Finance and Cryptio have built sub ledgers to track all your blockchain and crypto transactions, package them and process them through Zero as well. So even if you are a crypto business, you can still operate on something like Zero with an app to do sort of like a lot of the on-chain accounting work for you. So yeah, I think Zero is just a super malleable, flexible, scalable tool. Such a powerful marketplace. It's probably hard to sort of overlook something I use every day.
Awesome. And what's the best book that you've read recently?
Maybe not the best book, but I suppose definitely sort of the topical one. I've got it here in front of me. It's Michael Lewis's Going Infinite, which is the story of Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. I do warn the listeners that it is a very alternate view on what happened at FTX. Everyone looks on the media, they were criminals, people are in jail, people have been fined, there was this massive fallout from it. But Michael Lewis actually paints an alternative view around sort of the sophistication of the trading platform that they built, the just incredible intelligence that they had, the very lean workforce that they had to build such a valuable business, that they were quite naive with what they were doing. And in being naive in some respects, they actually did some really strangely great things. They invested in some AI companies before AI was cool, and they had a massive successfully venture portfolio that took off as well. So it was a mixture of naivety and things happening to them and that. So I think it's an alternative view and definitely worth reading. It does definitely go way below the surface on what was happening into the personality types and people.
Oh, that sounds really interesting, like a completely different view, the other side. I'm sure it probably also looks at the character of SBF and effective altruism, is that the right? Yeah.
Very much so, very much a key theme of the sort of the book as well, just around, sort of what a strange concept that is, working to give your money away necessarily. I mean, we're all charitable and we're all good people in our own respects, but having it as your sort of ultimate mission in life to become potentially as wealthy as you possibly can, to give it away to others for the better of the world, is pretty fascinating in itself.
Yeah, and certainly unusual. Sounds like a really good book. Definitely adding it to my list. And then next, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned about building a business?
Yeah, scaling businesses can and do sometimes take shortcuts, and that could be shortcuts on, the back office of their staff or their internal controls, or, everything's just got to, let's break things and move fast. But I think as sort of professionals, accountants with integrity, that work in the space, we have a lot of onus on us to ensure that we're trying to influence the right decisions being made and the right level of investment into all sorts of different things, internal control, processes, policy, and a lot of things, not to slow the business down, but to making sure that it's acting sort of in the way that it was. We're corporate stewards. So I would necessarily say that that's probably one of the most valuable lessons that I can, hiring people that have the same mindset as me and that have scaled businesses and, understand, the balance between the business moving quickly, but also making sure it's operating safely and sustainably as well.
Yeah, I think definitely a very valuable lesson. So a final thing to wrap up today's episode, if there's just one thing that listeners take away from today, what would you want it to be?
I definitely want it to be that cryptocurrency and the blockchain didn't fail people necessarily. It was a central party. It was FTX that failed people and, created a massive amount of fallout in the industry and really tanked the industry for a long period of time as well. So I think necessarily, crypto at its core focuses on decentralization, and I think necessarily centralized parties and businesses have their place to play in that, but equally they're at its heart still a centralized business. So we shouldn't confuse sort of the failing of FTX with the failing of crypto or blockchain as a technology. Would be one thing I hope people take away from this.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much for joining me again today for part 2 of looking at blockchain on Beyond Insights. I've learned a lot about this and I think it's a really fascinating topic. Going to share a lot of resources at the bottom of this episode if anyone wants to read more, and they should also definitely go check out the book that you recommended, which I will also add a link to. Thank you so much, Byron.
Lovely to be back, Alex, and thank you for spending so much time researching the topic and asking such insightful questions. It made me relive a lot of it again and sort of elements of it that I'd sort of taken for granted or maybe even forgotten about all in the midst of the drama of it. So yeah, really lovely to be back and honored for you to have asked me. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, and thank you also for taking all the time to revisit everything that happened in this very, very strange case.
Very strange indeed, but yeah. Thanks for having me, Alex. Bye.
Thanks, and bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Insights podcast.
Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to right now.
And please share with any of your colleagues or friends or family members that you think might benefit from listening to this podcast.
That's all from us. Until next time, see you then.